CA Bhavik Shah for today's 31st virtual meeting of Andheri Yoshibara CP Study Circle of ICAI of WRC on the overview of the valuation and opportunities for registered valuer. Uh, as all of you know, as a chartered accountant is expected to be as a master of all, there that's the reason CP program is conducting, and the valuation for assets, shares, and intangible is required to be certified by a registered valuer. The field of valuation, which was so exclusively earlier for engineer, the expectation gates were now open for the chartered accountants who are considered to be a financial architects of Indian economy. Now I introduce our today's eminent speaker, CA Bhavik Shah. Bhavik Shah is a practicing chartered accountant having post-qualification experience of more than 12 years. He is working with Transaction Square and is leading in the financial advisory services practice at Mumbai nearly for a decade. He also associate with SSPA and Company Chartered Accountant and then with RBSA Advisor. His main area of function are valuation for merger and acquisition, advising on the restructuring of business, conducting financial due diligence, and the general corporate advice. He is a member of the group uh, promulgated by ICI Valuation Standard Board for drafting of the valuation standard, which are adopted by ICAI RVO, the key author of ICA Valuation Standard 103 for valuation approach and method. He's also been associated with the several large corporate merger. He has carried out financial valuations of well-reputed Indian and multinational companies. He has been a regular speaker at various forums of ICI, ICSI, and ICWI. He is also chairman for the Residential Refreshment Course Committee of the Chamber of Tax Consultants for the year 2021-22. With this formal introduction, now I request to CA Bhavik Shah to start this presentation. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Jitendra ji. Thank you very much for a very exhaustive introduction. Hello, friends. I'm CA Bhavik Shah. If you are having some disturbance in my background, I'm apologies for that. There is some construction which is going on the road. Maybe we will have to bear with me for half an hour or so. I'm hoping that my video and audio is very clear to all of you. And I will just share the screen, and with that we can just start the presentation also.
Yes, it's perfect.
Yes. Okay. Jitendra ji, is it visible?
Yes, yes.
Yeah. So once again, good evening, friends. Evening sessions are a bit difficult, especially on a weekend. So I'm going to keep it basic. So when I say the word valuation, most of you would think about models and numbers. And you are right that there are lots of models and lots of numbers. But my endeavor for the next 2 hours is to establish three broad things. Number one being valuation is simple and we choose to make it complex. Every valuation has a story or a narrative behind it. A good valuation is more about a story and less about the numbers. And when a valuation goes bad, it's not because of the numbers, but it's because of the three big problems which I can see in the valuation. One being the bias. So most people, when they sit to down to value the company, already they have a preconception of what they expect to see as a value. It is very difficult not to have any preconception about a company. Everything that you have read about the company or is going to become a part of this preconception. If I think of a company as a great company, my valuation is going to deliver a high value. Let me add to this proposition. If you are representing a buy or a sell side, I'll tell you which direction your bias is going to be. The second being the uncertainty. Valuation is more of an art and less of a science. We all would have heard about this. The numbers used in the valuations are estimates and comes with a large uncertainty which is there. And the third being the complexity. There is a notion that if you make the model bigger, they are better. These models then become black boxes and we don't know as to who is running the model, whether we are running the model or the model is running you. So if we look at the valuation regulations, there has been a tremendous evaluation, what Jitendra Ji also mentioned, that earlier there were guidance which was available and now there are guidelines. So basically you have valuation rules which are notified by MCA. There are draft valuers bills which is pending to be notified, but it is expected any time that it will be notified. There are valuation standards which are adopted by ICAI and then adopted by ICAI RVO. Further, the lens of the scrutiny on the professional valuation is increasing tremendously, and hence we have to be mindful of what we are going to sign off as a chartered accountant or as a registered valuer. With this backdrop, I'll start my presentation. So first, let's look at the valuation concepts. Some of the basic concepts, I'm sure everybody would be aware that value is not equivalent to a price. Price and value are two different things. In a perfect market, they should be the same, but we don't operate in a perfect market. So price is mainly a function of the current market and the availability of the supply and demand. As I said, valuation is not an exact science, not an art. In Warren Buffett's term, it is called a craft. It is the more and more you develop this craft, more and more you will learn valuation as a subject. And believe me, friends, after spending 13 years odd in this industry, I'm still learning. Valuation is again date specific. So a 6 months old valuation may not hold good today. So it is at a particular point in time. It is date specific. If I do a valuation today, it might not hold good 3 months down the line. Valuation is subjective. When we say the word subjective, if 10 people are doing the valuation of the same company, they will arrive at a different values and all of them might be correct. And value varies with the situation. If we are doing a valuation for a merger, then the basis will be a relative valuation. If we are doing a valuation for determining a fair value, then the values will be different. So it also, the valuation definitely varies with the situation. We'll dwell into value varies with situation when we go ahead. Just moving on to the next slide. What are the types of the assets that one chartered accountants or a registered valuer can value? One is the securities or the financial assets. Second being the business valuation, where we value the businesses. And third being the intangible assets. The next being the land and building, plant and machinery, and all jewelry, archaeological paintings, and everything. These are more of a technical valuer's role which is required. And as chartered accountants, we don't have any role in valuing these assets. But there are certain firms right now in the industry who has registration for all the three asset class. So just taking a step back and explaining to you, there are the IBBI has given registrations for land and building, plant and machinery, and SFA class. So for the chartered accountant, we will fall under valuation of SFA, where we can undertake all securities, businesses, and intangible assets. So what are the opportunities for the professional? And there are plethora of opportunities, friends. As I mentioned that the world is converging towards registered valuer, and it is coming up in a big way. Jitendra ji, my screen is visible, right? Hello.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Okay. So if I have to bifurcate these opportunities, the opportunities can be bifurcated into four broad baskets. One being the business valuation. Under business valuation, there are corporate restructuring like merger, demerger, where a valuation will be required. For a spin-off, a valuation will be required. For purchase or sale of shares or of the businesses, if I want to sell my operating business to some third party, then at that point in time, a business valuation will be required. Over there, chartered accountants or registered valuer will play an important role. When there are family settlements which are happening, As an independent valuer, a registered valuer is appointed to determine how the assets have to be bifurcated between different families. That is one area of opportunity which is there for the registered valuer. The last being in that category being the fundraising. If I'm looking for a scale up of my operations and I'm requiring some funding, then at that point in time also a registered valuer will play an important role to determine what is the fair value the investor or the promoter can expect. Coming to the second basket, which is the regulatory valuation. uh, Over here, so FEMA and Companies Act I have covered in the subsequent slides. In detail, we will go through where there are professional opportunities which are available. For the Income Tax Act, I'm sure everybody would be aware that for 56(2)(10), when there is a transfer of a private limited company shares, at that time in 56(2)(10) and 50CA, a valuation is required as per the valuation rule, which is Rule 11(a). Again, in income tax, for a transfer in under Section 92, whether it is happening at an arm's length between an associated enterprise, at that point in time, a valuation report is required. Uh, Under Section 9, when there is a foreign company having a subsidiary in India, at that time also a valuation is required. So multiple areas where valuation is required, barring 56(2)(7)(b), where a SEBI Category 1 merchant banker is required to do a valuation. For all the other sections, it is a chartered accountant can also do a valuation. But friends, it is just within some years, I'm sure that this will also converge to a registered valuer. For SEBI regulations, when there is a preferential allotment which is happening under the ICDR regulation is required, whenever there is an open offer which is required to be made, there is a certificate which is required to be issued by a chartered accountant. At that point in time, a valuation report is required. Coming to the third basket, which is the intangibles, whenever there is a purchase or a sale of an intangible such as brand, trademark, technical know-how, a valuation will be required to determine the fair price of these intangibles. If we are hypothecating a brand with the banks for the loans, at that time the banks will insist on the valuation of the brands. I'm sure after Kingfisher, banks are not hypothecating intangibles, uh, but I'm not too sure because I have not done any intangible valuation for hypothecations. Uh, there is accounting, which is a sale consideration splitting is required in the books of tax. So what happens when like a concept is there in a purchase price allocation where the buyer will allocate the assets between different like tangibles and intangibles. For a seller, he will like to account whether there is any non-compete which is received as a part of the consideration, because this is required mainly from an indirect tax perspective for paying the GST and everything. The lastly being the impairment for an intangible asset which is required. Coming to the fourth basket, which is the financial reporting. Again, this is where registered valuers play an important role. So there are two views, friends, that some of them say that under accounting, since it is part of Companies Act, where a registered valuer is required to be adopted, to be appointed to do the valuation. But there is also another view where people have not been appointing a registered valuer and appointing a chartered accountant to do the financial reporting valuations. So there is a for financial reporting for a purchase price allocation, a valuation is required. As I mentioned that if the purchase price is 100 rupees, it has to be allocated between tangible and intangible assets, and the remaining is apportioned to goodwill. For a private equity or a venture capital fund, to determine the NAV, it is required. Usually, all these private equity and VCF report their NAV on a biannually basis. But having said so, there is a provision under SEBI regulations where they can take a special permission and they can get the valuation done on a yearly basis also. But PEVC space is something which is coming up in the big way. And this is a recurring work which I have been observing. So once you are on board with a PEVC fund, and if they have 20-25 investee companies, then every biannually you are required to undertake a valuation of those 25 companies and submit a report. for so that the fund can determine the NAV. Coming to the financial instruments such as OCRPS, which is optionally convertible redeemable preference shares or compulsory convertible preference shares, their evaluation is required under Ind AS so as to split between the debt component and the equity component. And the last category being a fair valuation is required as per the Ind AS accounting. So whatever are the assets which are there, a fair value, and as well as liabilities, a fair valuation is required. Moving to the next slide, as I mentioned that what are the valuation requirements under Companies Act. So friends, these are the number of sections where specifically a registered valuer is required to determine the valuation of the company. And so over here, I'll not go through each and every section, but over here, the idea is to say where the valuation is getting triggered by a registered valuer. And I have seen majority of the valuations being done under 60(1)(c), where there are preferential issue of shares, fresh equity shares which are being issued to the shareholders. Under 230 and 232, where a scheme is being or a scheme has been run. So over there, and under section 236, which is the purchase of the minority shareholder. So these are the three sections where I would have seen many of the valuations being undertaken by the clients. Coming to the FEMA, FEMA basically, if it's an investment in the Indian company, which is an inbound investment for a fresh issue or for a transfer of shares, and if it's an unquoted share, then fair value is required to be done as per an internationally accepted valuation methods. Now, the guidelines does not determine what are internationally accepted valuation methods, but looking by the conventional methodology, people have been undertaking these valuations. For a listed stock which is there, it is required as per the listing guidelines of the SEBI, which in a way tantamounts to SEBI ICDR regulation, where you have to follow a 26 weeks and a 2-week guide. For an outbound investment, if an investment is more than USD 5 million, then chartered accountants are not eligible to do a valuation right now. It's a category 1 merchant banker registered with SEBI, or an investment banker or a merchant banker registered in the target country, which is outside India. If it's an investment less than $5 million, a fair valuation by a CA or a CPA is valid. Friends, over here, a couple of months back, there was some amendment, and they are going to amend with the registered valuer also. So, as I was mentioning, that FEMA is converging towards registered valuer. The non-deposit rules have not been, non-debt instrument rules have not been notified yet, but it is just a matter of time that they will be notified, and this will be replaced with registered valuer. So we can see that registered valuer is gaining some traction, and it is of an importance. Like in 2017, when the registered valuer rules were notified, I think there were some 6 RVOs which were registered, and now there are some 16 RVOs which are registered. So just wanted to take you through the overview of what are the registered valuer rules. In this forum, are there any registered valuers? If they can just raise the hand or something. I don't think. How do you see a chat box? I'm not sure. Anyone who is a registered valuer over here? Sorry, I cannot get that. Okay. Sorry.
I have completed my training.
Okay. 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 So we'll just go through the registered valuer rules, and if anybody wants to appear as an individual, or if the firm needs to be registered as a registered valuer entity, then what are the steps for that? So section 247 is the charging section of the Companies Act, which says that a valuation of a property, stock, shares, debentures, goodwill, assets, liabilities, net worth of the company under the act has to be valued by a registered valuer. And the appointment has to be done by an audit committee or in its absence by the board of directors of that company. So as I mentioned, in October 2017, MCA notified the company's registered valuation rules. So there is an IBBI, which has an authority to administer and perform the functions under this rule. There is RVO, like there is ICI RVO, there is ICSI, there is ICMAI, and there are some couple of 14, 15 like IVO, RVOs, and a lot many, which has registrations under land and building, plant and machinery, or SFA. ICI only has registration for SFA class. And then there is registered valuer. So these are individuals, firms, LLPs, or companies. So technically, as an individual, we will become members of ICI RVO if we are completing a training and giving the exam. So we are members of the RVO, which is ultimately registered with IBBI. So what is required to be a registered valuer? One is to obtain an educational qualification and experience. Second is to pass the valuation exam. And third is to satisfy with the specified eligibility criteria. So what is obtaining educational qualification and experience? To be a registered valuer, we require at least a bachelor's degree plus 5 years of experience, or a postgraduate degree or a diploma plus 3 years of relevant experience, and or membership of a professional institute established by an act or a parliament, and 3 years of relevant experience. In addition to this, one of our friend mentioned that he has just completed an training, which is a 50-hour training, which is provided by all the RVOs. So that also needs to be completed, and then the person can appear for the exam. So what is this valuation examination? So valuation examination is, in a way, the syllabus is prepared by IBBI, and it conducts the exams for various asset classes. The syllabus is published on the IBBI website, and there is negative marking. So if there is a wrong answer, then there is 1/4. So 0.25, which is a negative marking, which is awarded. On passing of the valuation exam, individual will receive an acknowledgement of passing this exam, and then he can get himself or herself registered with the RVO. So there are no restrictions on the number of times that an individual can appear for the valuation exam. And friends, in 2018, these exams were very easy. As in when the day passes, these exams are becoming way tough. When they started conducting this exam, the question bank that they had was around 2,500 questions. And now what I hear is that there are some 25,000 questions in the question bank. So as and when time lapses, these exams are becoming really difficult to clear. Any question? If there is anything, you can put it in the chat box, or you can unmute yourself and ask also, or else we'll move forward. So what are the other eligibility criteria for an individual? A valuer member has to be a member of an RVO. Like as an individual, I have to be a member of ICI RVO or something. A recommendation has to go from the RVO of which I am a member to the IBBI, so to register me as a registered valuer. So friends, this is important, that I should have passed the valuation examination within 3 years before making an application. So if I clear the examination and within 3 years I don't make an application to IBBI for getting my registration, then that get lapsed and you have to reappear for the exam. Possess requisite educational qualification and experience of bachelor's plus 5 year or post qualification plus 3 years, what we just saw. Should not be a minor and not of an unsound mind. Should be a resident in India, fit and proper person, not an undischarged bankrupt, and not applied to be educated as a bankrupt, not convicted on any offense punishable with an imprisonment for a term of more than 6 months. So again, this is an important clause, and if there is an imprisonment of more than 6 years or 7 years, then you are barred to become a registered valuer. not a valuer member holding certificate of practice of professional organization. So over here, if you are an employee with some of the organization, you can appear for the exam, but you cannot get yourself registered unless you have a COP or unless you become a partner in that organization. Not convicted of for any offense involving moral turpitude and not being levied a penalty under section 271J of Income Tax Act. So these are the other eligibility criteria, and so one has to fulfill all the criteria. If it's a cross for any one of the criteria, then you are barred from having your registration. What are the criteria for firms, companies, or LLP to get registered as a registered valuer entity? So the company, firm, or LLP has to be set up for rendering professional or financial services. Again, not an undischarged bankrupt or undergoing insolvency proceedings. Majority of the partners practicing in India has to become a registered valuer, and at least one partner is the RV of the asset class for which the valuation is carried out. So at least one has to be registered valuer of an FSA class or land and building or plant and machinery wherever it is required. And none of the partners as an individual possess any disqualification as specified for an individual. So whatever these we saw, these all things has to be complied with all the partners. Then only the firm or the company or the LLP can be registered as a RVE. What is the process of valuation? So if you look at the process, I have broadly bifurcated into 4 different steps. One is to obtain the information, understanding of the business. Understanding of the business is a more critical step, which is often not looked at properly, if I would have to say. If we read whatever are the valuation reports that are available in the public domain, company X is doing something, but there is no deep diving in the business understanding, which is often seen, and that is the reason then the valuation goes back. The second step is to analyze the data analysis and review and discussion with the management. The third step is the adoption of the valuation methodology. So if we have done first 2 steps properly, then only we can come to the third step, which is adoption of the valuation methodology, as to what approach and what methods we will follow to value this company or the target. And we also try and do a sensitivity analysis by changing some of the assumptions as to what will be the delta in the values. And the last thing is to recommend, when you assign the weights to different methods which you have adopted, recommend the fair value conclusion that you have arrived to, and reporting that in the report. So coming to the analysis of the subject company, the first being the understanding of the business, which is very critical. One can also look at the industry analysis, such as the industry research, the consensus estimates which are available in the Bloomberg or Capital IQ or Yahoo Finance, because there are many consensus estimates which are available. Or as per the research reports also, many of the research analysts publish their consensus. What are the existing policies of the legal framework? So let's say if I'm valuing a chemical plant, how the effluents are being discharged, and whether that is properly being discharged. Is there any ban which is there? Is there some audit which is going on the company? Or let's say in a pharmaceutical, is there any FDA inquiry which is going on? If there is a temporary ban on the export or the import of certain particular product or a raw material, then one needs to look into it. Carry out a SWOT analysis of the industry as well as of the company. Profitability analysis of the company which is required. One needs to look at what is, so in the past, so what profitability has been achieved and what has been shown in the projections. So this is one of the important steps, because many a times what happens when clients, they will always come that saying that we need a valuation, these are the projections, just do the valuation and give the report. But that is not how it should work. You should always look at the profitability of the past. So what has been achieved in the past? If let's say I am valuing one of the entity and it's in the red in the past, and the projections will be very rosy projections, then one needs to deep dive into the projections to see what is going to change. So what is the moat which they are going to bring on the table. The financial ratio analysis, like the gross profit margins, the net profit margins, the EBITDA margins, the return on asset, the return on invested capital, these one needs to analyze. The projection analysis. So many a times what happens, the installed capacity is, let's say, 100 million tons. And in the projections, they would have given you in the last 3-5 years, they are achieving more than 100 million tons. This is a basic thing which as a valuer you are expected to do. But many a times the valuers miss out on doing these kind of analysis as to what is the installed versus the utilized capacity. If you are going to achieve a utilized capacity of 90-95%, then one needs to consider additional capex to serve the market. Second, is there a market which is there? What is the market share which the product enjoys in the market? So these are certain steps or certain things which we require to be analyzed to mitigate any inquiry that will come in future. Because friends, nowadays, whatever we do, the inquiry is going to come after 2-3 years when the valuation goes bad or if the company has not been performing well. So at that point in time, if all these things have been done by us, then it helps to save our skin in the game. The revenue and the expense analysis ratio. What is the capital expenditure? As I mentioned, if there are increasing capacities which is going forward, the working capital requirements. So just to give you an example, we were analyzing one of the division and in this working capital requirement, they did not project any working capital requirement. When we sat with the management, we came to know that he is in a way not providing us a proper data, and we refuse the assignment. So sometimes you will have to take a harsh call in refusing the assignments where you will not be in a way to provide a valuation report because the management is not cooperative also. Also, again, I was mentioning about the alternative scenarios and the sensitivities which are required to be carried out. So plus minus 1% change in the WACC, which is the weighted average cost of capital. What is the change in the value? Plus minus 5% change in the multiple. What is the change in the value? So that one needs to analyze and substantiate along with reasons. So what are the general sources of information that one needs to look at? One is the historical data, such as the audited results of the company, as I mentioned, industry and company overview, future projections if they are available, management discussions. So management discussion, so for every client that we cater to, this is one of the critical steps that we do. We have management calls, maybe 2 or 3 times, 2 or 3 times round we have with the management to understand the business. What is their view, why do they feel, and everything is documented. So that as a part of so what you can see on my slide is a representation by the management. So just to give you an example, let's say there is a contract which the client has entered into, but then they are not projecting in the projections. And the client is not sure whether they will be able to turn around in next year or next to next year. So then we manage, we put it, so this is as part of like what we have as audit papers. We keep it as a memo in our file. And we also take a representation by the management appropriately worded as to why this has not been taken into projections. Stock market quotations, announcements, if it is a listed and a frequently traded share, publicly available data on the comparable companies, and the market surveys and the newspaper report. So these are generic or one of the to-do things which one needs to look at when they are analyzing or valuing the company. Just a minute, there is something which is there on the chat box. In case of valuation for swap ratio and merge, can RV value land and properties on management valuation, or we will take a report from? So as a RV, you will not be in a position, as an SFA class registered valuer, you will not be in a position to value the land and properties. But you will have to take a report from a RV who has land and property registration. I hope I got this question correctly, Jitendra ji.
In one of the swap ratio calculated by RB, is
So
taking
can you be a
the
little louder? I am not able to hear you.
hello.
Yeah.
It's audible.
Hello.
Yeah. In one of the case, in the merger ratios, the RV is taking the valuation of the as per land of property as per the management basis valuation.
Hmm.
He is not taking the report from the other RV of the asset class. So is that correct?
Technically, no, because so I don't know how the management has given this basis, and if they are
No,
just giving
they
as
are
a ready
just
rate note,
randomly put the figure.
no, then technically no, because the IBBI rule says that the valuer cannot wish away from their liability. So if I'm relying on somebody else's work also, I should have done my cross checks and these things properly. So to be cautious, I would request the management to get an independent valuation report from a land and building valuer and then take it on record.
Yes, yes. Right.
So moving ahead, yeah, coming to the valuation approaches and methodology. Uh, so as we all know, there are three conventional approaches and methodologies. These have been also given in the ICI valuation standards, which are then adopted by the ICI RVO under 103 called the income approach, the market approach, and the cost approach. Income approach being what is the expected cash flow the business is expected to generate. You discount it to the present value, and that is the value under a DCF method, broadly speaking. Relief from royalty, multi-period excess earning, which without an option pricing are mainly done for intangibles. We'll not be covering that much into detail, uh, considering the paucity of the time and considering the subject matter. The second being the market approach, which is based on the multiples of the or the transactions which are there in the sphere, which are considered for valuing the comparable asset. So under this, there are three approaches, which one being the market price method. If it's a listed stock, then you can apply market price. We'll discuss everything in detail. The comparable companies method and the comparable transaction method. Under the comparable companies method, you look at the comparable companies which are traded on the stock exchanges, which in the listed space in India as well as out of India, uh, over the globe, and you determine a multiple and apply to the target company after making certain adjustments. Comparable transaction method, again, like we analyze the companies, we look at the transactions which has happened in the space uh, in the particular industry and then apply a multiple. The last being the cost approach. The cost approach is seldom used now. Uh, that being a reproduction cost or a replacement cost, a summation method, and an adjusted net asset value method. We'll dwell into all these methods as we move forward. So first being the income approach. So it is nothing but the present value of the expected cash flow of an asset uh, for perpetuity or for the limited life of the asset. It looks at the cash flow and not the accounting profit, which is very important. The value of the business is a aggregate of the discounted value of the explicit period, which is the projected period, plus the perpetuity, if there is any perpetuity. If it is a limited life project, then it will stop at the end of the explicit period only. It involves determination of the discount factor. Now, discount factors can be either WACC, which includes the cost of debt also, or it can be only the cost of equity. So it depends on what methodology which you are following, whether you are following a free cash flow to firm model or whether you are following free cash flow to equity model. We'll look into the free cash flow to firm and free cash flow to equity in the subsequent slides. And it also involves, which is very important, which is the growth rate for perpetuity. So after the explicit period, what is the growth rate one should consider? So there are two propositions which I have mentioned on the slide. One is that if an asset has to have a value, the expected cash flow from has to be positive. So whether in the first 2 years it does not have a positive cash flow, that's okay. But in the second, third, fourth, fifth year, at least it has to have a positive cash flow for an asset to have some value. The second proposition is that assets that generate cash flows early in their life cycle will have a higher value than the assets which will generate cash flows later. And as we all understand the present value or the time value of money, if a cash flow is generated in 1 year, 2 year, it will have more value than a cash flow which is generated at the 9th or the 10th year. So when to use a DCF method? So it's the most appropriate for valuing contracts, such as if you are going to receive X amount within 3 years or 5 years, as per the contract, then it is most appropriate method which is used for valuing the contracts or for determining your liabilities, such as if you have a debt in the books, which the payment is required in a staggered way in 2 to 3 years or 5 years, and this is the most appropriate way to determine the fair value. If there is a limited life project, so let's say if it's a road project, which is a BOT project having a 10-year or a 15-year as the balance life, then discounted cash flow is the best and the only method, if one has to say, because you cannot apply the comparable companies method for a BOT project. Large initial investment, and if there is a predictable cash flow which is available from the management, then one can use this as the discounted cash flow method can be used for valuing the entity. If there are depleting resources like mines, till the resources are exhausted, the discounted cash flow method will be an ideal method to use. For startup companies, as we all know, there is a euphoria which is there right now in the market of valuing these startups. So one of the method that can be used for valuing the company startup is a discounted cash flow method. There are innovative methods like Burkus methods, some other methods like a scorecard method, which is available to value the startup companies also. But startup companies, the discounted cash flow method, if it's for a regulatory requirement, which says internationally accepted valuation method, I'm sure most of us would have done assignments and using a DCF method only. So as I was mentioning, what is free cash flow to firm and free cash flow to equity model? So free cash flow to equity model is, we are looking at the cash flows after considering expenses for tax, interest, and debts for the debt payments. And free cash flow to firm, we are looking at the cash flows which are available to all the stakeholders. So it is the cash flow which is available to the debt as well as to the equity holders. For free cash flow to equity, we need to use a discount rate which is equivalent to my cost of equity. For free cash flow to firm, I have to use a discount rate which is equivalent to a WACC, where cost of debt will also be embedded into the WACC. Now, many of the reports where I would have seen that the rates are interchanged because we are not clear as to what method we are following. And if there is an error in using a discount rate, then the values will, the valuation will go back. So this is an example to just show you that what happens if we are using or interchanging the cost of debt and the cost of equity, then what will happen to our valuation. So this is a simple example which I'll just go through. So there are 5 years, 5 projected years. What is the cash flow to equity, which is 50, 60, 68, 76, and 83? What is the interest expense year on year? And what is the cash flow to the firm? 90, 100, and whatever. There is terminal value which is given. So we don't need to calculate the terminal value. Again, it is given in the film only. The cost of equity is 13.6. The WACC is 9.94. And the tax rate is 50%. And the debt which is there in the books is 800 rupees. So what is the correct solution for it? If I have to follow FCFE, which is the free cash flow to equity model, the cost of equity is 13.62%. I will discount all the cash flow to the equity shareholders. If I can go back in the slide, 50, 60 is all my cash flow to the equity shareholders. I will discount at the cost of equity, which is 13.65. 625, and I will arrive at a valuation number of 1073. So this is the value which is available to the equity shareholder here. As a just reiterating that we will not reduce debt because the debt is already forming part of my cash flows. So the cash flows are after reducing debt. If I'm following a free cash flow to the firm model, I will use the cash flow which is available to the firm, which is to the debt as well as the equity holders. I will discount it with VAT, which was 9.94. I will arrive at 1873 as the value, which is the enterprise value. From the enterprise value to determine the equity value, I will reduce the debt, which is 800 rupees as per the problem. We look at if we are following as per books, if you are following FCFE or if you are following FCFS. Just give me. So if we are following FCFF or if we are following FCFE, the value for under the DCF will come to 1073 only. So the first principle of the valuation is never mix and match cash flows and the discount. If you are following FCFF, use a VAT. If you are following FCFE, use a cost of equity. If we mix and marry the cash flows and the discount rate, so let's say if I'm using cash flow to the equity shareholder, and if I'm using a VAT to discount it, then there will be an upward bias in my value. If I'm valuing cash flow to the firm, and if I'm using cost of equity as the discount rate, there will be a downward bias. My valuation will go down as against the correct value. So just to prove this hypothesis, so there is first problem, which is the error 1. I have used the cash flow to the equity and I have discounted it with VAT. So over here, my value is coming to 1248. If I go back, my value should be 1073. 1248. So I have overstated the equity value by 175 rupees because I'm discounting it at a lower rate. If I use cash flow to the firms and if I discount it with the cost of equity, my present value will be 813 after reducing 800 rupees of debt, and the value of the equity is understated by 260 rupees. Error 3 is that if I forget to remove the 800 rupees as the debt, then my value will be overstated by 540 rupees. I hope I'm clear. So the principle is to never mix and match the cash flows and the discount rate. And that will give you an upward or a downward bias as to what discount rate you have used. So what is the horizon period one should look at? So when we are valuing a company, what should be the horizon period? The horizon period is usually 3 to 5 years because beyond, I truly believe that beyond 2 to 3 years, everything is an extrapolation in an Excel file and nobody can predict it. So 3 to 5 years is the horizon period. Basic criteria is to achieve a stage of stable growth. And if an industry is passing through some rough phase, like if I'm valuing an automobile industry right now, when there is a semiconductor chip shortages, then I will at least cover a cycle where a rationalization of the projections are reached. So for a cyclical business like steel industry or something, it is ideal that we cover one business cycle of maybe 5 years or 7 years. So this is on the horizon period. Many a times client will ask us that what are the number of years for which you are looking at the projection. So whether you are considering 3 years, 5 years, because sometimes clients don't have an idea as to for how many number of years they need to submit the projections. So what is the perpetuity growth rate one should adopt? For the perpetuity growth rate, one needs to look at the historical data as to what growth the company has achieved in the past. What is the competitor's growth rate? If the competitor is growing at a higher growth rate, then why that competitor is growing at a higher growth rate vis-a-vis our growth rate? What are the macroeconomic factors such as what is the GDP growth rate which is there? What is the inflation, etc. One needs to look into it. One of the ideal way also is to look at the reinvestment rate. If I'm paying 50% as my dividend, then my return on invested capital is 10%. Then what is the growth rate that I will arrive at? Maybe 2.5-3%. That is what I'll arrive at. So one needs to look at that to determine what is the perpetuity growth rate one can plan for in the terminal years of the or the perpetuity period of the DCF. So ideally, it should not be more than the expected economic growth rate, maybe 5-6%. And the growth rate that we are considering should be either nominal or real. It should be based on the cash flows that you are using. If you are using a real cash flow, then then it has to be excluding inflation. If you are using nominal cash flow, then it should be including inflation. How do you calculate the discount factor? So discount factor is basically the CAPM method is one of the widely used method to calculate the discount factor. I'm sure everybody would be aware how do you calculate WACC, and we all have studied in finance classes and in chartered accountancy course as to KD and into the debt weightage and cost of equity into the equity weightage. So not getting much into it, but if there are any questions, I'm happy to take it. There are also other ways which are given in the valuation standards as to then one is called as a build-up method. If there are AICPA valuation guidelines or the accounting guidelines which are there, whenever we are valuing the startup, this kind of methodology will fail. So they have given a guideline as to what is kind of a startup, whether it is a pre-revenue startup and it's a pre-prototype startup. Then they have given a range as to what can be the range of discount factor that can be considered. So in a pre-revenue or a pre-prototype startup, the discount factor can be as high as 50 to 70%. So again, as I was mentioning that how do you value the cost of equity? So the formula is risk-free rate plus beta into the expected risk premium. So what are the issues in the DCF valuations? So if we are only considering this as one of the methods to value the company, the one of the issue which is major issue according to me is that the projections are highly subjective and hence could be inaccurate. There can be an upward or a downward bias from the management as to what is the valuation that they are looking at. Inapplicable when projections cannot be predicted by the client or even it cannot be provided to us because of the price sensitivity nature of the projections. It is difficult to measure the risk. When it's a loss-making company in the past and going forward, they have shown that it will be making profit. It is so you have to take this DCF method with a pinch of salt. Assumptions about the cash flows and the discount rate has to be internally consistent. If it's a pre-tax or a post-tax discount rate, and the discount rate has to be consistent with the underlying currency in which the cash flows are made. So what I mean by is if the projections are prepared in USD, then the USD is so you have to calculate the discount rate as per US currency and everything. If you are following in Indian INR projection, then it has to be an INR discount rate, and both will be widely different. Coming to the next approach, which is the market approach. Again, this is a very widely used approach for the purpose of valuation. First being the market price method. In market price method, it is only doable when it is a listed stock and when there are no unusual or significant fluctuations in the market price. So if it's a thinly traded or a dormant stock, or let's say a Z group entity or a T group entity, usually we will not take the market price method for valuing those companies. We also look into what is the trading frequency of the stock. So as per the SEBI norms, the trading percentage, if it is more than 10%, then only it is treated as a frequently traded stock. So the formula for that is to determine the 12-month trading volume divided by the outstanding number of shares. So if it is more than 10%, then it is a frequently traded stock. we usually do this analysis for the comparable companies also, whether we need to give weight to such kind of companies in our analysis when we are valuing the target or not. So as I mentioned, if it's a frequently traded, then only we consider. Otherwise, we don't give any weightages to it. We also consider where the trading volume is the highest. So if it is listed on 2 or 3 different stock exchanges like BSE, NSE, wherever the trading volume is the highest, we consider that market only. And even SEBI also considers one of the market price method as one of the important method for the preferential allotment or for takeover code, as we discussed earlier. So what are the limitations of the market price method? It works only when there are regular and free trades which are available in the company shares. And it is very difficult to rely on only this particular method when there is high volatility in the price because of the rigging, or if there is any news item which has got leaked, then there is very high volatility in the price and it is very difficult to rely. So we need to, so valuer will have to apply his judgment when he is relying on the market price. Coming to the comparable companies multiple method. As I mentioned, that what is this method is you determine the comparable companies multiple of different comparables. Whether you can use an EV by EBITDA multiple or an EV by revenue multiple. So once you apply that, so as I was explaining to you what is the enterprise value and the equity value concept. Enterprise value is available to all the stakeholders of the company, and equity value is available only to the equity shareholders. So under enterprise value, you will reduce debt and arrive at the equity value. So when I'm applying an EBITDA multiple, you arrive at the enterprise value. When you are applying a revenue multiple, you arrive at the enterprise value. You reduce debt, net debt from it, and you determine the equity value. When I'm applying a PE multiple, which is a price to earnings multiple, I will directly arrive at the equity value. And there is one more method called as a book value multiple, which is usually used for valuing NBFCs and banks, where assets base play a heavy role in valuing the company. So a book value multiple is used of the comparables to determine the equity value under this method. So comparable companies and comparable transactions method go hand in hand. Those are hand in glove method, I would say. In a transaction, you analyze the transaction. In comparable companies, you analyze the comparable companies in the similar sphere. So coming to the market multiples, if we look at, so the thumb rule is that we look at the underlying element of similarity when you are comparing or choosing the comparables. But no two companies are similar. So if I am trading into, let's say, a steel hot rolled and cold rolled, and somebody is trading into a wired steel, then again that I will treat it as a comparable. But every company, you will not find an exact replica or a similar trading company in the market. So then you will have to look at the secondary comps also. And this is where the judgment of the valuer will also play an important role as to why you have rejected a particular X or a Y entity and what is the reason. So when we are doing some assignment, we usually write what is the reason that we are removing or not taking that entity as part of our comp set. So this is very important in terms of mitigating the risk which comes at a later stage. Also enlightening the board, because there will be some questions which board members or an independent directors from the board may ask, that why and what are the set of comparables that you have considered, and why X company is not taken as a set of comparables. And you might have your own reasons of choosing one company and discarding one company, but it is advisable that you write a reason as to why you are not considering a particular company. It is based on the market multiples of the listed company, like a PE or an EV or a revenue multiple. Again, as a cross check, what we do is, if there are any industry specific multiples, like EV per ton for a cement manufacturing company, or EV per bed for an hospital business, EV per room key for a hotel business, EV for per towers for a telecom tower business, or percentage of AUM for the asset management companies is something which we try and cross check as to what is the value we are getting. So if we are getting an EV per ton for $100 for a greenfield plant, we try and corroborate the valuation with some other methodologies. So what are the steps for comparable companies multiple? One is to identify and select the comparable companies. You compare the target with comparable companies. So whether that comparable company is similar to the target company or not. You adjust the multiple for the growth, for the size, for the control premium, or the marketable minority discount if it is there. And you apply the multiple on the appropriate financial metric. So what I mean by financial or non-financial metric is either you apply it on a PAT or an EBITDA or the book value, non-financial metric being per ton or per key, or so that is what we saw in the previous slide, and you derive at the enterprise valuation. So these are the broad steps when you are doing a comparable companies or a comparable transaction multiple method. Just some of the case studies which just to give a better understanding of what we discussed so far in the market price method under the comparable companies and the comparable transaction approach. So this is case study 1. There are two comparable companies, company X and company Y. The net worth is 100 and 300 million. The net debt is 200 and 150 million. The point to concentrate is there is expansion CWIP which is 125 million INR, and for company X as well as for company Y it is 25 million. So if I look at the net block, my net block for company X is 125 million, for company Y it is 300, and equivalent amount for company X is an expansion CWIP which I am undertaking, and this CWIP can be funded through debt as well as equity. We are not sure about it. The revenue is 200 million and 500 million, and my EBITDA margins are given as 12.5% and 12%. The enterprise value, which is 375 million for company X and 650 for company Y. If I do EV by EBITDA, I arrive at a multiple of 15 times, and for company Y, I arrive at a multiple of 10.8. The question is whether this 15 times multiple, is it correct? And I want to value the target company. So I want to determine what is the enterprise value and the market cap. I have given what is the revenue, what is the margin that I'm enjoying. And just to mention, company X and company Y are in the similar space, are exactly comparable to my entity. So if anybody wants to mention as to whether the 15x multiple is correct multiple or not, and if it is not, why it is not a correct multiple. If anybody wants to give it a try, we can wait for 1 minute, otherwise we'll skip to the solution. So coming to the solution, the 15x multiple is not correct because the enterprise value of X 375 has loaded 125 of the CWIP. If I remove CWIP and then compare, my enterprise EV EBITDA multiple works out to 10x and 10.4x. So if I apply the average multiple to the target company EBITDA, my value comes to around $229 million. So what I have done is in 375, this 125 is already loaded. I have removed that. I arrive at 250. 250 divided by what is the EBITDA is 25. So I arrive at 10x for company X. For company Y, respectively 10.4x. Company Y, there is no major impact because $25 million is not going to make a major impact. And friends, this being an expansion capex, this needs to be adjusted. If it was a maintenance capex, that is not required to be adjusted. So I take the EBITDA of my target company, which is 42. I apply an average multiple of 10.2. I arrive at the enterprise value, remove net debt, and arrive at the equity value of 229. Moving to the next question. So there are companies A, B, C, D, E. These are the revenue streams for all these respective companies: EBITDA, EBITDA margins, what is the market cap, debt, enterprise value, and what are the CAGR growth for 3 years for revenue as well as the EBITDA, and what is the EV EBITDA multiple is the last column. So EV EBITDA multiple is nothing but EV by EBITDA. I hope I'm clear on this as to what we are trying to say. The highlighted portion is called as the mean. The mean is 11. The median is 10.4. Usually we prefer and utilize median when we are doing any valuation so that any outliers or from the population is taken care of. So we use the median multiple. The target company details are given, which is 221 million is the revenue. EBITDA is 40 million. My EBITDA margin is 18.1%. If I look at the revenue CAGR margin and the EBITDA margin, I'm having in a way a highest revenue as well as the CAGR, EBITDA CAGR margin, which is 15% and 16%. The question is to determine the enterprise value, market cap, and what is the EV EBITDA multiple that I should use in this kind of a scenario. I hope the question is very clear. If I can go to the solution. So the mean multiple is 11 of the comparable companies. The median multiple is 10.4. This is nothing but what we have worked out above. I have applied a premium for growth considering my revenue as well as my EBITDA CAGR for the target co is more than the comparable, and I have given a premium for the growth of 20%. And then I have adopted. So as a valuer, I feel that I should enjoy a premium because my revenue and the EBITDA CAGR is higher than the comparable. So I am outgrowing as compared to my comparable companies or the comparable space. So I have adopted a multiple of 12.5. EBITDA of the target company is 40. 40 into 12.5 is it gives me an enterprise value of 500. The net debt is 100 and arrive at the equity value of 400. Coming to case study number 3, this is more on the comparable transaction multiple approach. So these are the comparable transactions under which the target company operates. So there is T1, T2, T3, T4, T5, and T6. 6 transactions. What are the date of the transactions? What is the consideration that has been given? The stake which has been acquired, and the equity value. So these are the implied equity value, which is nothing but 300. So if I have to give you an example, for T1, it is 300 divided by 5% will give you a 6,000 as the equity value of the transaction. The revenue is given, which is there in the second last column, and what is the PAT, which is there for these companies. The first line of the problem says that what is the reported revenue of the target company and the PAT of the target company for FY21. Now from this, I will only select those comparable transactions which are relevant for my sampling. So T1 I have not selected because PAT is negative. I will get a negative multiple, so I have removed that from my pool. T2, T3, T4 I have selected. T5 I have excluded because the consideration is not available. So that data is not available in the public domain technically. So I have excluded that transaction. T6 being a dated transaction which happened in 2014. If you see the date, which is 1/4/2014, and this was 6-7 years back, I have not considered that transaction. So if I look at the P multiple, So if you look at the second box, which is T2, T3, and T4, my implied P multiple is around, the mean is 12.1 and the median is 11.9. I take the target company's PAT, apply a P multiple and arrive at the equity value of 3,792 crores. So any questions till market price method? Because with this, I have concluded two methods. One is the DCF and the market price method. Any questions in the chat box? Okay, I think we have become masters in valuation now. So coming to the last method, which is the cost approach. So the cost approach is nothing which is defined under the ICI valuation standard. It is it reflects the amount that would be required to currently replace the service capacity of an asset. So it is also called as the current replacement cost method. And why do a valuer use a cost approach? So cost approach is seldom used, but it is used when there are situations where you have to determine the liquidation value of the company, where it's a holdco and the holding company holds investment in underlying operating companies. Then at that point in time, you will be using a sum of part method where the operating companies will be valued using a DCF or a market multiple method, and that will be summated to determine the value of the holding company. The assets which have not started generating revenue, so if it's a newly incorporated entity, the assets are under construction, at that point in time, it will be a cost approach will be an ideal method to use. Or lastly, if it is being prescribed under the guidelines or the statute or the shareholders agreement that it is mandatory to use a cost approach when there is any corporate action which is happening in the company. So as we saw earlier, there are four cost approaches method, one being the replacement cost, the reproduction cost, the adjusted net asset value, and the summation method. So what is a replacement cost method? It is also known as a depreciated replacement cost method. It is a cost which is required by a market participant to recreate an asset with the same utility, but it has to be adjusted for an obsolescence. So obsolescence is basically an obsolescence for the life of the asset, functional or an economical obsolescence. So the physical condition of the asset may not be similar, but the utility has to be similar. We'll take some examples to see this. What do we mean by a replacement cost method? What is a reproduction cost method? You have to produce an exact replica of that asset. And again, it has to be adjusted for functional, economical, or performance related obsolescence. So the difference between replacement and reproduction is an exact replica. So if I have to create this mouse, so for this, whatever is the material, raw material, which was required exactly at that point in time, I will use that and reproduce this asset. And what is the cost of reproducing this asset? Adjusted for some obsolescence for the life of the asset. And if it is a replacement, then I can use some other raw material and recreate this asset. And that is a replacement cost method. Coming to the adjusted net asset value method. So adjusted net asset is nothing but a book value method. Under the book value method, you adjust with the fair value for trade receivable or tangible asset for land and building. So when you are replacing the value of the land and building, it has to be adjusted for the selling cost which is required to be incurred. So when it is used, it's a non-operating business, as we discussed, when the company needs to be liquidated. And this method usually we do to determine what is the floor value of the asset and what is the minimum value asset should command in the market. So let's say if a manufacturing entity, if I'm valuing, usually I will not give any weight to it, but I will determine the book value and see to it that my operating value is not less than the book value of the asset. The lastly being the summation method. The summation method is nothing, as I mentioned, that we value the operating assets separately and we follow a sum of part approach to determine the value of the whole. So let's look at the case study one under the cost approach. So in this screen, there is Agnipath, which was released in 1970 or 75, which is the old Agnipath. There is Agnipath, which is a remake starred by Hrithik Roshan and Sanjay Dutt. And below you can see the Friends show and the Friends reunion show. The point and why I chose this example is to give you a flavor of what is a replacement, and so which one is the example of the replacement method and the reproduction method. You would know that first one is a replacement method where the actors are replaced and this movie has been recreated, and the second one being the reproduction method where the star cast is also the same. Coming to the adjusted net asset value method. So this is a typical balance sheet of a company where fixed asset is given, investments, current assets, current liabilities, and the liabilities which is funded by debt and the equity and the reserves. Now the additional detail which is provided is the land is accounted for the books at the cost basis and the market fair value of the land is 400 crores. And the investments which is there of 200 crores, the fair value is 250 crores. And the current assets are realizable at the 50% of their value. And there are no contingent liabilities. The point here is that I need to determine what is the enterprise value and what is the equity value of the company using a adjusted net asset value method. So nothing, what we have done is I have replaced 400 is nothing but the fixed asset value of 150 has been replaced with the market value, which is 400. 250 is the value of the investment. 50% of 100, which is the current asset, where I have seen where the problem provides that the current assets are realizable at 50%. And after reducing the current liability, 650 crores is the value of the asset. So this is nothing but the enterprise value, which is 650 crores. Moment I reduce debt, I arrive at the equity value of 550 crores. What are the common adjustments which one needs to do from the enterprise value to determine the equity value? So one is the market value of the investment, which we saw in the previous problem, where 200 is the value of the investment, which is as per the books, and 250 crores is the value of the investment. So that is one of the common adjustment which is usually required if you are not valuing you are valuing the investments separately. If there are any surplus assets like unutilized land, building, or assets which are held for sale and that are not forming part of your operating assets, then the value of those surplus assets on a net of tax basis has to be adjusted to arrive at the equity value. Surplus cash and cash equivalents. If there are any contingent liabilities, so one needs to study what are these contingent liabilities, what is the probability of the devolvement. One needs to discuss with the management as to what is the probability of the devolvement of these liabilities and then adjust to determine the equity value. So the value which is attributable to the equity shareholders. Convertible instruments, if there are any ESOPs or convertible preference shares, then in CCPS usually we take the adjusted equity base. So we take the diluted equity base when we are determining the per share value. If there are any vested ESOPs, then if these ESOPs are in the money ESOPs, then also we take the diluted equity base to determine the value per share. But this is an important adjustment, which many a times this has been not looked into in detail, and it might have a bearing on the value. Loan funds, I've been seeing that loan has to be reduced. Hello. 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 Hello.
Yes, sir.
Am I audible?
Yes, yes.
Okay. Just give me a moment. I think I lost my. Is my screen visible, Jitendra ji? Hello. Hello.
Yes, sir.
My screen is visible, right?
Yes, 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 sir.
Okay.
It's perfect.
Sorry for this. Um, the lastly being, if there are any preference share capital like redeemable preference shares, then that has to be considered like debt-like items and reduced while determining the equity value of the company. So coming to the last part, what are the contents of the valuation report? Friends, the IBBI or the evaluation rules provide what are the contents of the valuation report that one needs to look at. And these are the bare minimum contents which are required in the valuation report, which are being issued by the registered valuer. Again, IBBI has been proactive, or ICI RBO has been very proactive in uh, putting on board as to what are so when there has been a peer review of the valuation firms which have been happening, then where are the lacunas and what are the valuation reports where they are seeing that these contents have not been followed properly. Right now, there are no actions which has been taken, I believe. But as we evolve with the time, there will be some disciplinary actions which will be taken against the valuer if the valuation report is not as per the valuation rules, which is not followed as per the intent and the spirit of the law. So first being the background and the information of the asset being valued. If we are valuing a equity share of the company, if we are valuing trade receivables or inventory of the company, it has to come out clearly in the valuation report as to what we are valuing. What is the purpose of the valuation? So if it is for FEMA, if it is for income tax, if it is for submission to companies with the NCLT for the purpose of corporate restructuring, and who is the appointing authority? Whether the board of directors have appointed you, whether the management has appointed you, whether it is the buyer or the seller who has appointed you, has to come out clearly in the valuation report. What is the identity of the valuer? So if Bhavik Shah is issuing a report, then Bhavik Shah's registration number, who is Bhavik Shah, 2 3 lines is the synopsis which is required in the valuation report. Like Jitendra ji was mentioning that if there is any experts report which we have relied on, then that should come as a separate caveat or assumption that we have relied on some experts report for determining the land and building valuation should come out clearly and specifically in the valuation report. If there is any conflict or if I have some interest in the subject asset, then that has to be disclosed in the valuation report very clearly. The fifth point being the date of appointment. So let's say if my valuation, my date of appointment is maybe 1st of April 21, and I'm doing a valuation of 30th September 21, then those two dates have to be clearly specified. And what is the date of report? So these 3 dates are 3 different dates. And so the date of appointment is when you got your engagement letter signed or when you got appointed. Second is what is the valuation date. So let's say the valuation date is 30th September and I'm issuing a report today, then the date of report will be today. And the valuation date will be 30th September 2020. What are the steps or the procedures that I have considered while undertaking the valuation exercise needs to be clearly specified. What inspections and investigations I have done. Uh, what are the sources of information which I have relied upon, maybe historical past data of the company, audited financials, management projections, which I've relied upon. We discussed on the procedures. What are the restrictions on the use of the report? So if I'm issuing a report, let's say for internal management consideration, that report cannot be used for uh, doing a deal or transferring of the shares under FEMA or income tax, because that is used for the consummation, or it is required to be used by the board of directors for their internal consumption. And if they are doing some transaction and if they are submitting this report as per the statutory regulation, then this report cannot be relied upon. So we have to specifically carve out what are the restrictions on the use of the report. The valuation can undergo a change if I am doing a valuation for internal management on a fair value basis, and if I am doing on a relative basis also. So the values under different bases of valuation will be different. What are the major factors that were taken into account during the valuation? So here, just to give an example, I was doing one of the valuation where INR USD depreciation was not considered in the raw material pricing. So we went ahead and we did a adjustment on INR USD depreciation in the projected period, and we caveated that in our report that we believe that this is what, because if there is a significant exposure to USD for the company and they have taken a constant rate of INR USD which was considered at 72 or 75 rupees, they did not depreciate. So my margins were getting impacted because I did not have a subsequent hedging in terms of the export. Uh, so we then caveated our report as to what were the major assumptions or tweakings that we did to the management projections, and then derived at the conclusion. The last point being the caveat limitations and disclaimers. To the extent that they explain or elucidate the limitations faced by the valuer, but shall not be for the purpose of limiting his responsibility for the valuation report. So this is very important. I think in 2020, ICI has come out with some of the caveat limitations and disclaimers as to what can be used. ICI is also as on some Sundays they had some lecture also, and I think which is available on ICI website as to how caveats, limitation, and disclaimers should be drafted in the valuation report. So with this, I complete my presentation. I'm happy to take any questions that you have, and I hope I have been able to do and take you through this complex subject of valuation in a short time, which was assigned to me. Hello. Hello.
Can you share the number with participant?
Sorry, my number?
Yes, yes.
I'll share. So I'm happy to take up any questions if there are any in the chat box or just shared.
Members requested to put their queries in the chat box. No queries is posted. I think you explained so well methods.
You have to I'll just stop share, and I'll share this presentation also, Jitendra ji, with you post this session, and maybe you can forward it to your members.
Yes, yes. Good evening, everyone, to one and all the participants in the virtual webinar. I extend my gratitude to our eminent and the stalwart speaker, CA Bhavik Shahji, for accepting AOSC invitation from his busy time schedule on Saturday evening. CA Bhavik Shahji is having vast and practical experience in the large size of valuation, and he humbly share it with our participants and explain valuation method and opportunity of CA in valuation field in such a simple words and with lots of illustration. On behalf of Andheri Yoshiwara CP Study Circle of ICI of WRC, I put heartiest vote of thanks to CA Bhavik Shahji and hope his physical presence in the coming CP programs at Raheja Clinic.
Thank you so much.
I special thanks to CA Anisha Kajiji, CA Amish Sangoi, and our convener Deepak Mandlecha ji for their sincere hard work and effort to make this webinar successfully. Thank you everyone for making this program successfully.
Thank you so
Tomorrow
much.
we have 32nd virtual CP meeting on Sunday, 21st November 21 from 10:30 a.m. to 12:30 a.m. on the topic presumptive taxation, interplay of section 44A to 44A on Zoom by speaker CA Manish Daftari ji. I request to member to take benefit of that and join tomorrow in large numbers. Members, one more announcement. Please note that we have planning for physical meeting on next 28th November for which the topic and the speaker name will be disclosed in the WhatsApp group in the due course.
Thank you, Jitendra ji. Thank you everyone for having me. If there are, I have also shared my email ID. If there is anything I can be of help,
Thank you.
Please feel
Sir,
free to reach out.
I will share it with the members.
Sure.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, everyone.
Now I am closing this meeting.